Commissioner Malcolm.
Randy Malcolm, 5th District.
Miriam Bleacher, second district.
Rob Knight, 4th District.
Keith Kaufman Gray, Chair, First District.
Sheila Snow, First District.
Lansing Duncan, 3rd District.
Okay, let's move on to and do we have any public comment for anything that is not on today's agenda?
We have received no request for public comment and we have nobody in attendees.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to the minutes for March 13th, 2023. We have the minutes that were sent, and then we should also have in front of you suggested revisions from Commissioner Duncan.
Mr. Chair, I'd be glad to go over those if you want.
Go right ahead, Commissioner Duncan.
Okay. First off, we've got a date that's incorrect under the listing of the minutes, so it needs to change to be February 13th. And then there's some minor changes to the actions under the minutes, simply so that we get the right tense and so that the word to is in the right place. So those are just clarifications regarding the motion. And then some suggested language as to the description about the bridge, making it clear that where it is. And if we say Department of Transportation, it's California, so it's Caltrans, I think, tells it all. And then just some clarification with Witosh, Commissioner Witosh and myself provided information there. Then I think generally speaking, having as built in quotes is a good idea so that people will understand that. And we need planners to be in plural there. And then, of course, this was the most complex thing we did was to look at the bridge replacement on the dam at the Botanic Garden. So mostly this is a matter of clarification of language. We've also got duplication in that one bullet is totally replicated, and we don't need that. And we also want to make it clear that we were actually looking at the as-built replacement. And that's important because we obviously did not have the same amount of discretion. It had already been built, right? And we were operating under an emergency situation the county was. So those are actually the relatively minor suggestions I would make, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Duncan. Any other revisions or comments? And welcome, Commissioner Witosh.
If there aren't any others, I'd be glad to move for adoption of the minutes of March 13th, 2023 as amended. And I would note that Commissioner Nye made the first set of notes regarding our actions so that both myself and Jonathan were working from his information originally.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do we have a second for the approval of the minutes?
I second.
Okay, Commissioner Witosh seconds. So let's do a roll call vote because some people were not here that time, that last month. So again, we'll go from my left, Commissioner Malcolm,
I'll abstain.
Commissioner Bleacher.
Aye.
Commissioner Kaufman Gray, aye.
Sheila Snow, aye, except for I have to abstain over the Botanic Garden one,
Okay,
but to the rest.
Duncan, aye. Witosh, aye.
okay, they're approved. And thank you again, Commissioner Duncan, for going over those revisions for us. It makes it a lot easier. Okay, we'll move on to staff updates, item number 4. Do we have any from staff?
No updates from this side of staff. I'm not sure if they have. Nope. No
Okay,
staff update.
So I'm going to go over a couple of things. I always figured this is the part where I can put in some things, even though it doesn't say chair update. But I wanted to go over some things. After our last meeting, we kind of discussed the budget a little bit. And County Council Ann Ryerson and myself were able to get a meeting with Andrew Rasura. He is a Deputy Director of Finance over Planning and Development. And I believe he's fairly new. So it was a really nice meeting him, and also it was a Zoom call. And to ask these questions that we came up at our last meeting. One of the questions, if you remember, that came up was, can we use our planning development professional services for things like purchasing plaques? And he was pretty confident that yes, that's okay. So that was nice to get that answer. And I was asking a question, general question, basically, and it came up with the mileage in that, you know, we always submit our mileage after the end of the year. How do they access the money from the previous year to pay for that mileage? And he was kind of like surprised. I think Ann can agree with that, oh, well, mileage and parking, that should be done monthly. And I explained to him, well, we don't really do a lot of visits and travel. And he said, well, then at least it should do quarterly. So that is why you all had emails this week about turning in your mileage in month through the end of the last quarter. The end of March was the third quarter. So Jonathan Martin sent out emails with the forms. So please get those filled out as soon as possible and get them back to him. Yes, Commissioner Miller.
Okay, thing is, I've not received a reimbursement for literally years. It's since when Leah was doing Jonathan's job, something happened. I've been submitting to the lady at the front desk there, and I've heard nothing. So I'm not exactly sure even quarterly is gonna work.
Well, go
So-
through Jonathan.
Yeah, I haven't, and
Yeah, go through
I guess there's
Jonathan.
been some transitions with COVID, stuff like that, but I've heard nothing from their county department, nothing. Literally a few years, I've not received a reimbursement.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I went through Jonathan last year and I did get reimbursed. So it seemed worked for me. And
I mean, submit the paperwork.
yeah, it's.
Well, you always have to go through the front desk there, and she's like the gatekeeper, so I just give it to her. I'll give it to whoever, you know, Jonathan or David or whatever.
Yeah, I would give it to Jonathan and then he can,
Well, okay,
okay, but I'm sorry to hear that because we have a budget for it and we should all be reimbursed. And actually, I think it's better for us not to have to wait a whole year to get reimbursed, especially for North County commissioners. You're traveling a lot, and that, if you saw on the form, it pays, you know.
well, I've been doing it every half year, so I don't think that's too unreasonable, is it?
Well, they want it more now. So I would say at least we're going to start doing quarterly. So at the end of June, we'll ask for the last quarter for this fiscal year.
All right,
But yeah, if you have a problem, let me know. Please let me know.
okay, I did. then.
Because I was surprised. Actually, my payment came pretty good after I submitted the last time. And and that's the other thing. I'm only what they want is make sure you go online and get a Google map and put in where you live to the address here, and it will tell you the mileage, and you're supposed to use that mileage. So don't use mileage on your odometer, use a Google Maps. And if we do a site visit, that's the same thing, from your house to that address, and then do it going to and going back. Staple that Google Maps to your form so they know exactly what the mileage will be. Is that clear? Okay. So if you haven't done it, please do it, because you are entitled to get reimbursed for your time to come. Okay, any other questions on mileage? Okay. I'll move on. Also on the call, I mentioned, and he knows that we are talked about Andrew Rasura is, we're way over when we go to the budget later today, that we're way over on planning and development staff support. And I wanted to know, it's been happening for the last few years. And why is that the case, since we do have less one person assigned to us and we're still being way over? We don't have a planner assigned to us during meetings. And he said, well, during COVID, because of Zoom, everybody was way over. because Zoom took a lot longer for meetings, as we all know. We went into late afternoon sometimes. This county had funds at that time for COVID that helped offset that. And currently, right now, they don't have those funds anymore. So we have to stay within our budget. And if our planning development goes over, we will not be able to use our other line items. And I know in the past we were able to. So when we get to budget, you'll see that we are almost completed our budget for 2023. And I asked, well, this doesn't seem really fair. We have less people and our budget is very low. And he says, well, it depends on the length of the meetings. The longer the meetings, the more staff time it takes. If we have a meeting every month, that takes up more staff time too. So we're just gonna have to be a little more, we want to get our business done. We don't want to clog up people that want to get their projects through. I mean, that's our job, is to really give a good deliberation on projects. But the bottom line is, as far as finances go, they want us to stick to our budget. And if we're over in one area, it will come out of areas in the other. So this is something brand new to all of us, because we always thought planning staff support was something that was out of our reach or out of control. And it turns out we're still responsible. So let's see what's moving here. Oh, and during that conversation before, I talked about being able to use our professional service budget for the project we wanted for Chris Urban for this current fiscal year. And at the time of the conversation, he thought we could. And as I just explained, he came back to me last week and said he just got confirmation that we cannot use that line item for this fiscal year. So when we get to the Chris Urban's statement of work plan, we're going to move it into next fiscal year. And Mr. Urban has agreed to the timeline to start his project in July, which would be in the next fiscal year. So that is the reason why that will happen when we get to that line. So that was our discussion on the phone. It's nice that we have someone I know who to talk to on finances. Before, I never knew who to talk to, and I don't think Ann was sure either. But I mean, at least we have a face to the person, and it's not really good news, but it's something that, and he mentioned that, the next 2 years, the county budget is going to be very tight. They're, of course, I don't know if they finished the county budget for next year already, but I know they were working on it. I think it's too late to try to get, in their comments and stuff, but it's just something we have to live with. So anyway, that was the call that we had with Andrew Rasura. And to give you an idea, our budget is $6,800. He mentioned this, and so if we have 12 meetings a year, that comes to $566 for a meeting. That comes out to about 12. Well, it's not a lot of time, because staff time is not cheap. So that just gives you an idea of this. Any quick questions on this? No, it's not really a question thing, but
No, I know we're going to talk about the budget a little bit
Right.
later. But since this is our opportunity actually to ask questions of staff,
okay.
one thing I was looking for is our old minutes, which I used to be able to find on our website. I can't find them now. And when I went to the part of the county site, which carries and sort of acts like agenda and minute center, it lists all these other agencies, commissions, boards, but not us. And when I went through the page, which is our page, and it says agenda and minutes, it shows the box files that we get as part of our packet. So it has the unapproved minutes. I can't find the approved minutes.
So I have submitted a ticket to IT so we can add historic landmarks to that list that you just showed right now. So that it could be available on the historic landmark side, and as well as the agenda and minutes poster you put up right now. So it'll be available on both sides, but I will update the improvement. It sounds like it's a matter of record keeping to put in the approved minutes from the G drive that we have for the county into that folder.
This is information not only do we need, but the public needs to have access to it. And so it should be in both places. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing that up and noticing that too. Okay, seeing as there's no other staff updates, let's move on to item number 5, project discussion. The County Historic Landmarks Advisory Commission will discuss funding potential historic projects and supplemental letters information received. I thought we'd first start off with the considering of approval of proposal by Chris Irvin to complete the several remaining preservation issues remaining from the 2022 project, as well as additional preservation actions based on analysis of the 2022 electronic inventory. Now, we all have his proposal that was sent to you. And like I said, we're going to be having to change the dates on this proposal if we decide to go forward today. And we do have Mr. Irvin today here. And would you like to come up and kind of go over your proposal? And thank you for coming in person today. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Thank you. So I'm Chris Irvin. Sure. So the SOW, the statement of work, picks up where we left off with last year's work down on all of the legacy HLAC materials, the hard copies that are in the hearing support office. So, and I had observed that there were several things that we still needed to do, preservation items. And that list of items is here on this document, starting on page 2, halfway down, where it says deliverable materials. And if you'd like, I can go through each one of them. I'm not sure it's up to you how much detail you want me to get into.
I don't think so. I think we've all kind of gone over this before. So, no, I don't think it's necessary
Okay.
unless a commissioner would like to go over it.
I reviewed this morning and it's very well prepared, very well written, very complete.
That's what I
Excellent.
thought too. It's very
I
explains and detailed. So I think if everyone's looked at it, I think the document kind of explains for itself. I guess, the main thing would be go over, I know you said you had some concerns about the percentage of
Right.
one to the other, maybe go over that a little bit.
Sure. So under these deliverable materials, there's 8 items. It's a grocery list of 8 items, and they're in no particular order other than what I thought was important. So this proposal is time and materials. So we decided on a not to exceed $3,000 budget for this. But because these items are sort of the leftover items from and a much easier to estimate project, which was last year's project, it was a very easy to say, okay, there's so many linear feet. I know how long it takes to process a linear foot. So it's easy to estimate. This is a little more difficult because now we're dealing with things like reformatting digital materials, optical disc, magnetic material. And once I get into that, you can never know. Sometimes it goes smoothly, sometimes it takes a little longer. So I'm not sure how much I'm going to be able to get of all 8 of these items into the budget, within the budget that we described here. So what I wanted to make sure of is that if there is a priority that commissioners would prefer that I work on, I'm happy to do that. If I'll work on it, what I think is important, which I think is the reformatting of the at-risk materials, the magnetic media. So, things that are like floppy diskettes or audio cassettes that are on magnetic medium, those can be decades old, but even optical discs, so like CDs and DVDs, that material, even if it's 5 to 10 years old, that if it's not if it's like the homemade stuff you can burn on your machine at home, that material can also be at risk. So those are the things I would concentrate on first, if it was my preference, but I also want to make sure that the commissioners, agreed with that kind of approach. But otherwise, the other types of materials, that the preservation type things that need to be done, like, making sure that the acidic paper of the newsprint is separated, or at least reformatted to non-acidic paper, and that the newspapers, the original newspapers, are actually sleeved so that they're not actually touching, and also sleeving the photographs to make sure that they don't fuse together. Things like that are probably less critical. But my feeling is I can get most of what's on this grocery list done. I just want to make sure that we understood that there's a possibility not every bit of it will get done, because there's a lot of unknowns from my perspective.
Any comments from commissioners on his approach for doing the project?
I have some comments, but I don't know if we need to hear from the public first before we make our comments.
Yeah, that's true. First of all, I forgot to ask the ex parte, but I don't think there is any for this item. It's not really an agenda item, but yeah, is there any public comment on this?
We received no request to speak, and we have nobody in the attendees.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. Go ahead, Commissioner Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Urban, for coming this morning and your patience, because he's been asked repeatedly to revise his proposal as the changing information we received from the finance department told us what we could or couldn't do. So I really appreciate that, and also just dealing with the bureaucracy. Okay, as compared to getting the work done, which is what we all want to do, obviously. So I want to thank you for the very clear proposal, and it's great. He's not only dealing with the things that he saw left over at the end of the other project, he's starting in on the pile that we've made because we could see there were missing documents and things that didn't quite jive. There's some puzzles in here. So I know some of these things will just be harder to do, and they will really depend in some cases upon staff finding documents for you. And I see that here, this action is subject to contractor being able to obtain paperwork. So we want to make sure that the county staff, for the things that we need to find, can lay their hands on these or know to look to the Board of the Supervisors, and so that then they can be put in the appropriate file, and where there are questions, we can solve them. So personally, I trust Mr. Urban 100% as far as the priorities go. I would imagine he's obviously going to do the things that are more straightforward up front, and the problematic ones he will nibble on as he gets the tools and information. And I understand that some of these things can be problematic. In the landscape trade, with a contract, you have what's called a rock clause. And if you're digging underground and you find a rock, well, that changes things. But then you need to be able to adjust your bid. Thank you.
Yeah, and at this time too, I asked Mr. Irvin, since we're going to be changing the start date, I want him to actually let us know what is the best time for him to start in July. And then if he needs the 60 days, which I think was the original timeline of the very first proposal, which we had changed halfway to 49 days. So did you go over your calendar and figure out a date that would work with you?
Sure, and I looked ahead of time. So July 1st actually starts on a Saturday, and as you may recall, I work on Saturdays on this project. So I could start on July 1st, but then I noticed it's Independence Day weekend. So I'm thinking July 8th would be the earliest I would start.
Okay, and you like the 60 days period?
So, yeah, so let me let me comment about that. So the 60 days is, I see as a kind of to give the commission an idea of how long is this going to go on so that, you know, if it were to go on way longer than 60 days, you would know to ask me, why is this going on so long? I don't know that it's actually going to be exactly 60 elapsed days, because there might be some Saturdays I might not be available. And so, you know, the way I bid it out actually is it's 36 total man hours, person hours, if you will. And that easily fits within 60 days, 60 elapsed days. So I could go somewhere on a Saturday if I needed to. So I think it'll easily fit within the 60 days, but just so you know, I just use that as an envelope to let the commission know what I think is about the right amount of time it's going to take. But the bottom line is, it's a time and materials, and you know, when I see that I'm getting close to hitting $3,000, I stop. So make sure we don't go
Mr.
over
Chair.
budget.
Yes, Commissioner Wood.
Are those calendar days?
Yes, calendar days.
Okay.
Yes.
So I guess our question is for the commission here is, do we want to have them start July 8th? And if it's by hours, of course, we don't want it to do hours, then it could take a whole year for 30 hours to go by. So it's good to have the 60 days. But if it needs to go longer, we can always come back and extend the work period.
Right.
So,
So, sorry, just let me
Yeah.
clarify again. So I usually work about 6 hours on a Saturday. So, you know, 6 times 6 is 36. So that's really only 6 Saturdays that I've got to fit into over the course of, you know, 2 months.
Okay.
So I think it easily fits.
so when we do, we'll have to do, to prove this, we'll do an amendment to this contract to starting July 8th and going for 60 days. Any more commissioner comments on this? Someone would like to do a motion on this contract? Statement of work?
Okay. Mr. Chair, I would move that the HLAC accept Mr. Irvin's statement of work revised so that he would begin on July 8th and that it would take approximately 60 calendar days for the project. And with the payment as described in the contract, with 2,340 right now as the labor total and an estimate of $400 for the materials.
And I believe there's the upfront $1,000 to get them started.
$1,000 deposit.
And that's the reason why we had to move it to July, because we couldn't get him to start and pay him out of next year's budget because he needs the, you know, the 1,000. Okay, do we have a second?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I'm amending that to $600 for supplies.
Thank you.
And I'll second.
Okay, we have a move and a second. Any comments on the revision? Okay, let's do a roll call vote. Again, we'll start with Commissioner Malcolm first. Aye. Bleacher.
Aye.
Commissioner Knight, aye.
Commissioner Coffman Gray, aye.
Commissioner Snow, aye.
Duncan, I.
Watosh, aye.
Okay. Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Urban.
Okay, we're still under project discussion. We had as you remember at the last meeting, we talked about assigning subcommittee to look at plaques. Of course, at that time, we thought we had money in this year's planning and development. In our professional services line item. But the signage committee has met, and Commissioner Duncan, do you want to go over it, or do you want me to go over it?
Why don't you go over what you
Okay.
are aware of, and then I'll fill in what I think I might be.
Well, I went down to the Santa Barbara Monumental Company. If you remember, this is the company that has done our plaques for many years. We actually found the original contract from 1982 when it cost $168 for a bronze plaque, 8x10. And if you remember, when we had our signage subcommittee, I went down pre-COVID and asked them what the current rate was. And at that time, it was $400. So I went down to find out what it is now. And I had a very nice person that helped. And she looked it up and it's $450. So it really is not that bad, plus tax. And so when you add the tax, it's, you know, less than $500 for a bronze plaque. And she said that the number of letters you put on a plaque, it doesn't affect the cost. And so it's basically a bronze plaque, 8x10 with reverse mounting, because they do the front mounting, but reverse mounting makes it a little less susceptible for someone to try to steal the plaque. And so she put in the computer, the bid that we put in. So she knows, you know, she knows that that's the amount. And she put it under historic landmarks for the county of Santa Barbara. So it's in their computer system that is what they will charge us for bronze plaques. So as you know, we have no money at the moment. So it's something that at least we know. And if we get into next year's budget and we decide we want to do a couple of plaques, if we decide it's necessary, we have that quote to go. And Commissioner Duncan, would you like to follow up?
Yes.
Anything?
In this regard, obviously, when we did the landmark signage assessment, we looked at all the landmarks and visited them and documented what signage there was and what they may or may not need. And there's a lot of variety. Of course, and it's all over the county and over a lot of period of time. And of course, a number of them have these old wooden signs, but those wooden signs actually need some maintenance. That's one thing that might occur. In some cases, they simply need to be straightened and the post reset. But there are a number of places where a plaque might be desired, and also places where I know owners actually want plaques. So based upon that signage assessment, I think we could easily come up with a list of places that this would benefit the county and actually fulfill part of our mission in terms of educating the public about our historic landmarks. When you start to look at the list, I think obviously public buildings come first to mind where people are most likely to see them. And certainly buildings that are commercial add to that. Although there are some private or sort of quasi-private buildings. And they also, of course, tend to be ones that are more recent. So I started to pull up a list together, and they, for instance, had Maddie's Tavern, which although there's some markers there, it doesn't have a marker saying that it was a county historic landmark. And Hartley House, both of those are public and a lot of people are seeing now. The Coral Casino, according to our assessment, doesn't have a signage for it. And that's one of our more remarkable buildings in the international style. And now we have Rocky Nook Park. And there's the Main Beg Farmhouse, which is foundation like. So I think we could easily put together a list that would serve as our priorities going through these. And what I think this whole finance lesson is teaching us is we need to spend these monies right out of the gate. And so we should be ready to spend this money in order to get this job done early in the year. So coming together and discussing that is an important part, and finding out what the plaques will cost obviously is too. So I would just suggest that we'll be revisiting this then. And certainly I recommend to commissioners, especially those who were part of the assessment, to think of landmarks they in particular think ought to get some educational treatment in the way of informational signage or plaques. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to add, it's great publicity for the county that we have these wonderful landmarks to have these plaques. So it's not that expensive to give this recognition when people go to these, to see that these are historically preserved. And, I would hope the county would agree that, that the more positive publicity is good for the county. So anyway, so we'll continue working on this. Do we have more questions? Yeah, Commissioner Witosh.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Duncan, is there an option where landmarks that go onto a private property could be paid for by the private property owner? And therefore maybe unburden us from having to meet these out over time because of our budget constraints. Mr. Duncan just mentioned 6, I think. And if you multiply 6 times 450, that's $2,700. That's a substantial portion of our budget. So I'm wondering if we can get some mileage by offering the option and letting these owners of private property know that if they wait long enough, we could probably, work it into our schedule, but our budget, but it's going to take time. How do you feel about that?
Mr. Chair?
Again,
All I was gonna put in is, I remember that was a question years ago, and it was just the feeling that, okay, it's up to the owner to do it. And now this is great that the county is actually being responsible about it and actually going through it, which I always thought, if the county landmark, hey, present the owner with a plaque. Yeah, it was kind of like a unwritten policy that it was always up to the owner before. So I'm not exactly sure, how to prioritize, but yeah, I think Lansing has a good roadmap for that.
Mr. Chair, we're going to have to contact these owners anyway in order to ascertain that they would want it and to confirm the appropriate locations that would satisfy both themselves and ourselves. So, yeah, I think we could easily request some contribution, and it's not a bad way to make our funds go a lot further. But there has been obviously a concerted effort by the county in the past, because all those wood signs didn't get up there by accident and done by individual owners. Those I believe were a campaign on the part of this commission. Just as there's also a brochure that was made, it's out of date now, but it's really quite informative about our landmarks. And I'll pass this around. So this is another educational thing, that there's a lot of different approaches we could use this, but I endorse Commissioner Witosh's suggestion, and that only makes sense.
Okay, well, I think, the subcommittee is ongoing, so we will continue to work. Commissioner Nye is on vacation, and he's kind of part of it, and I know Commissioner Snow was part of it before. So we'll work on it, and, maybe if we feel like it's time to put it on the agenda for agenda item, we'll put it on the agenda. Commissioner Malcolm again?
Sorry, it's kind of related to this, but kind of on a tangent, because not all of our projects, which were landmarks, or signage, I'm thinking specifically of let me start over. The stagecoach route sign, all along State Street, and there's some up on San Marcos Pass. That was done a few years ago. I think Wells Fargo kind of headed it, but we were still, as a commission, kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, sponsors of the thing. And those signs are faded out. They're not they're not bronze or they're just, I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, they're just fading out. Some have a lot of graffiti on it and they need to be updated as well. So as far as being consistent with a bronze plaque, I don't know if that would be appropriate for that particular one. Set of signs, but maybe consider that, or maybe call the other sponsors like Wells Fargo that to update them maybe.
No, there would. The stage response, yeah. Commissioner Bleacher?
Yeah, so it sounds like if we are offering the opportunity to private property owners, or rather encouraging them to participate in contributing to signage, do we have any sort of protocol in place as they go through the process of applying for a landmark where that is then offered to them?
At the part, no, I don't believe there is. And the money coming from private too is something we'd have to go through county council, I think, just to make sure we don't get any problems, as far as getting private money to pay for a plaque that we're approving. I mean, there might be some legal issues in there. I don't know, but we want to make sure we dot everything. But that's something that the committee can go through, and discuss and work with everybody, all parties involved.
Mr. Chair, I think another concern on that would be the alternative of using public monies on the private property. I think there's probably a lot of things to look at.
Yeah. That's why we were first looking at, of course, Maddie's Tavern is private property, so we were kind of looking at more visible ones instead of like a home that is behind a gate that a plaque would not be seen by very many people. Okay, well, let's move on with our agenda, but I think the committee has a lot to go over and discuss, and we don't even know what our budget is for 2023-24 yet, so we'll have to wait and see since we already spent some of that money today. Okay, we're going to move on now to item number 6. This is the HLAC budget. The County Historic Landmarks Advisory Commission will discuss their budget. Everyone should have in front of you the current state of our 2023 budget. As you can see, it's the staff support item that is way over. It's almost, well, it's just way over. We have spent 222% of our budget. We're down already 8,000 in the planning and staff. As I mentioned earlier, in the past, we've always kind of ignored that line and looked at just what we had remaining in professional services, travel, and office expense. As you can see, and all the other lines were way under. So right now we're at 89% of our budget spent, the 75% at the time elapsed. So again, we're a little underwater. If you look at our planning and staff support budget amount is $6,800. I told you earlier, I broke it down, and actually, the finance person also broke it down where it came out to $560 a month. Commissioner Duncan this week did some research on his great filing system that he has, and he found the fiscal year budget for 2010 to 2011. Can you put that, always put it up there? And if you look at the planning and staff support for 2010 and 2011, it's the same as what it is today. And we're talking about 11 years later, and it hasn't been increased. And I know salaries and benefits and all of that has gone up a lot since 2011. So on Friday, because I got this on Thursday, I believe, from Commissioner Duncan. And so I sent an email to Andrew Rasura and asked for an explanation of why we haven't had a line item increase and it's on this, whereas something that I'm sure the county does like a cost of living increase every year kind of across the board. And why we haven't had that. That was Friday, Easter weekend. So I haven't, of course, heard back from him yet, but I do have that question into him. And like I mentioned earlier, this is the time they're doing the budget right now. It might already be finalized for next year, but maybe they can move internally in planning and development, some of this around a little bit. But as you can see, it's very discerning, at least to me as chair. And you know, I don't know if anyone wants comments on this, but that is, you know, again, I want to thank Commissioner Duncan for finding this old budget because it kind of opens our eyes. And the other thing that we kind of noticed, and I've got to look into this, is, but if you notice our professional services, it was quite high this year. And remember, we had asked for a rollover, and I'm starting to think that that includes the rollover that we had asked for, which at first I think said it was denied, but I think it got rolled over. And that 9,100, I think, was part of the rollover. But anyways, you see historically, we were only at 4,500. They called it a different line. It was called historic survey, but they now have professional services. But as you can see, travel is the same, office expense is the same. Basically, it's the same all across the board, except for the professional service line, which again, I believe was a rollover. So any questions on our budget or what we're showing up on the screen?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
could we just flash back now to what we have now? Okay, so now, what we're showing is that P&D staff support is costing us 15,062. So I would say we should be asking the county, you should be 250% of what our 2011 budget was. This is just realistic. If you want us to fit within the line, then please give us a line which provides the staff support we need to do our job.
Okay. Any other commissioner comments? Yeah, Commissioner Witosh.
I see the number 2.5 times approximately. And I'm just wondering whether this is an abnormal number because of COVID and because of Zoom and because of other, and once we return to normal, I'm sure it wouldn't go back to 6,800, but it might not be as much as 15,000. Does anyone have any thought about whether this number is a normal operating budget number or whether this is an expanded one to meet an emergency situation?
I asked that to Chris on that call, Andrew Rasura on that call. And we basically have been in person all this year. So this has been in-person meetings. I mean, sure, we do have online, but we've always had online people online. So I think this is pretty accurate for a regular meeting in person. Now, last year or the year before, when we were doing Zoom COVID meetings, I know our time went way over. As you know, our meetings went to 2, 3 o'clock sometimes. And this year we've had some long meetings. I mean, our January meeting went real long because it was basically flooding outside, and we said, well, what the heck, we're in here, let's just do it. And we plowed through and we went on for like 2 o'clock or so. But by doing that, we spent a lot of money. But we got the people's work done, I think. I mean, we got a lot of projects through that if we had adjourned, they would had to wait another month to get that approved. So, you know, I think a lot of times we're going to have to spend more hours just to get through the backlog of projects that people want to get through the planning process. But
Mr.
this
Chair,
year, though, we've had pretty much in-person meetings.
so that brings up another question about packing and stacking the agenda. It's possible that some of these meetings that went over were because we had either projects that were very complicated or we had too many projects you know, on the agenda. And it is always, he said, the people's work is always, I think people are entitled to a speedy trial in the United States. So this idea of getting the people's work done in a speedy manner. Does that mean that we have to work late and work longer and, or do we just simply make people wait and space it out?
That's a complicated question because
It is.
again, we always get, people think, oh, historic landmarks, we have to go through them, that our project's gonna be even longer because, and it gives us a bad name that, we're obstructionists. And, as we know, we're not, we're always trying to help
Yeah.
them have a better project. But the general public, at least on the construction side, think that, oh, it's another hurdle they have to go through. And so the idea of trying to speed these through makes it so the hurdle isn't so hard for them. And so I would hate to have to keep postponing these projects because, as we all know, costs go up exponentially now. And if we postpone a project 2 or 3 months, their costs for that project just go up so much too.
That's the question I know comes up at the city a lot with their HLC and ABR review and SFDB is how much do they stack? And sometimes the city goes until 9 o'clock at night. They used to, and they would buy dinner and all the rest, but we don't have to go that far. But that is a question.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I have an email into finance department about this and I'll keep you informed, what's going on, hopefully something, but I just wanted everyone to know, we usually just zip over our budgets and we just say, okay, yeah, it looks good, and we move on. And the budget is important and they definitely are cracking down the next 2 years because there is not the finances there. But this is very glaring that shows that they have not increased our staff, budget for so many years, that something needs to be done. Commissioner Bleacher.
Just for comparison, and it is very eye-opening to see this, that there hasn't been an increase in at least this long, but just for comparison, I'm curious if you've looked at a budget from just before things shut down with COVID, one of our regular years more recently.
I was planning to do that. I hadn't a chance. I mean, I've been fine. I keep everything we've done, but it's in a file in the garage and I have to go through that. And I'm digging through, trying to find, I'm going to dig through and try to find for that. And maybe Lansing can dig too. But I know I have them. It's just a matter, I haven't gone through and done that yet.
I'd just
Commissioner
like to
Witash?
say that appreciate very much you're bringing this to the surface and talking about it because it has been, I just don't even pay attention, have not been paying attention.
Well, I think
in
a
the
lot of us,
past.
we've been looking at what do we have left that we can do, like plaques and
Yeah,
stuff
right.
or files. And we just kind of ignored that staff support. And now they're cracking down that, oh no, you have to go by your total budget to be able to do.
So I'm looking at this budget up on the screen. And we're way over on staff support and we're under on professional services. So we can't trade back and forth.
No, and that's why we were hoping that what we just approved
Yeah,
today would have gone
yeah.
in this year's. And we were actually hoping that maybe we'd have a few dollars left to do a couple of plaques too. I
Right,
mean,
right.
Lansing and I were Commissioner Duncan and I were working on, well, if we quickly do this, we can maybe get a couple plaques done
Right.
this year before we lose that money.
Right.
Well, we've already lost that money.
Got it. Got it.
Okay,
Okay.
well, we need to move on. Let's move on to the agenda. But, okay, no more budget questions. I didn't want to cut anybody off. Okay, thank you. Okay. We are ready for district reports, item number 7. Do we have any district reports today? Okay, no district reports. Let's move on to our standard agenda. Item number 8, the Alamo Pintado Bridge replacement. The County Historic Landmarks Advisory Commission will review and provide comments on Caltrans proposal under expenditure authorization 05-IM420 to replace the Alamo Pintado Bridge. The proposed project involves assesses parcels number 139-540-056 and 139-540-055. The bridge is located on Highway 246 at Post Mile Market 30 in the Solvang area. It's in the 3rd Supervisorial District. And before we get started, I want to ask any commissioners, do you have any ex partes or anything on this particular project? Commissioner Duncan?
I'm very familiar with the site. My market is right there and my gas station is there. And my bank, which has been previously flooded because of previous issues, I've had my safe deposit box flooded. So I'm well aware of the multiple problems that this bridge represents, but also of the historic aspect of parts of the area. Thank you.
Okay, any other commissioners? I just want to mention that I went to the project site, I walked the project. Again, most of us have ridden by it many, many times, I'm sure. And I also just want to say that after our last meeting, because I had mentioned this project at our last meeting as something that just to give comments to, I picked up the phone and I called Mr. Lecky, who's here today, and he picked up the phone. And I thought, wow, that's, first of all, that was quite impressive. I thought I would just leave a message. Turns out he was at lunch and he was still willing to speak. And also I found out he was in Santa Cruz at the moment, looking at all the road damage up in the Santa Cruz area. And he actually had time to talk about the project. And he said that the project had been extended since the March 27th deadline, because that's why I talked about it last time. I thought that we had to get comments in. And he said that he would be able to talk on it if it's on an agenda item. So it is on here today for us to look at it completely. And and if there are any other ex partes, I'll just move it on to Mr. Lecky, and he can go ahead and do his presentation.
Thanks, Commission, for having me here. This is I'm Dan Lecky, District 5 architectural historian for Caltrans. I don't really have too much of a formal presentation to give today. Basically, the materials that were provided, if you guys were able to kind of go through them, I was just kind of going to come here and answer any specific questions about the project. It's pretty straightforward. We're replacing this bridge, the Alamo Pintado Bridge. It's about Post Mile 30 on the 246 there in Solvang. The bridge was built in 1954 and widened in 1976, I believe. It's been previously surveyed, determined not eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, not eligible for the California Register. But because of its age and the fact that we're replacing it, you know, it's nearly a 70-year-old bridge and we are replacing it. We're just doing the full slate of studies and confirming that, you know, previous determination that it's ineligible for the National Register. So, you know, along with that, I send the materials to any potentially interested parties, including yourselves, and just putting it forward for comment. Because of its proximity to some other architectural resources, including little A-frame building and some Mission Revival style buildings, commercial buildings nearby. Just wanted to get comment on that too, due to, you know, potential impacts on the setting. We don't anticipate at this time any, you know, direct impacts to the buildings. But through this process and in speaking with some of the historical societies here in the county and in Solvang itself, there have been some concerns brought up about nearby Mission San Ynez National Historic Landmark site. And, you know, while we don't anticipate any impacts to any historic period resources associated with that site, we, you know, want to be extra careful and, you know, make sure that we're being, you know, totally transparent about what this project is and, you know, what the potential impacts are. So, you know, I've been out to the site. This was in February, slightly after the rains. I'm sure Commissioner Duncan is aware the area was pretty badly impacted by the recent flooding, actually. The little A-frame building that's kind of closest to the northwest corner of the bridge there is actually a veterinary office. Thank you for the laser pointer. It's actually a little veterinary office, and there were like some fencing behind. I'd imagine they were kind of like kennel areas or places where they just held the patients, if you will, that had been pretty much completely destroyed. So yeah, the flooding issues seem to be pretty bad in this area. As part of the project, it looks like we'll be kind of armoring the stream bed a little bit there and hopefully doing some flood protection for the future. The bridge will also be, I think, quite a bit higher to kind of come up above the floodplain in that area. And then one comment or question I got from Commissioner Duncan prior to the meeting was, we have kind of a very large looking, this shaded area here is our impact area. I'd imagine that a lot of this area, going toward the east away from the developed area has been included in this project area almost as sort of, this is our study area. We're at a very preliminary point. The project hasn't been extensively designed yet. Everything is very preliminary. But when we're doing work in, a stream bed, sometimes they just might want to take a look at additional opportunities for potentially biological restoration or doing, some additional work on the pathway. So I don't quite know why there's so much area included to the east, where maybe we might be more concerned about some potential historic period resources. But at this moment, I would imagine, that the project being proposed, the core components of it are really just, contained around the bridge itself, which is like right there. That's the bridge. And there's some stream armoring going on, right around where the properties that kind of are closest to the bridge there. And then we're trying to kind of reconform a new bike path in this area. So a lot of that stuff to the east may just be sort of, they're asking us to study it for pickup items for later on, but I don't think there's anything proposed in those areas at the moment. That's pretty much all I have on this. Like I said, it's a pretty straightforward project, but if there's any additional questions, please feel free.
Okay, let's start with questions to Mr. Leppy. Commissioner Duncan.
I can provide a little bit more information just for as context. So the bridge here is right here. The thing is the new bridge is going to be at a higher elevation. So that's going to have to be feathered out with the highway and the surrounding properties to some degree. Yeah. And so the structures that you've got listed on that front page of the letter are where the Vets Hospital is here, where the barber shop is here, where All Pond is here. And I remember meeting with Al Hess, who used to have an office supply of business right in this building. And he was complaining to me about the day he saw Caltrans pave the highway and create this drainage, so that now the drainage went into his place instead of off from his place. And they created essentially a pocket of water there. And it's obviously a problematic aspect of building our roads and paving them over and over and over again. And if you happen to then be between the roadway and where the water wants to drain to, which is the creek, that's what happens. But raising this has to be done. It's really what's happened historically is that trees essentially come down Alamo Potato Creek and clog up underneath the bridge. It creates a dam, then it just floods over the highway. And this is one of the most busiest intersections in the valley. So the creek is going down here. In terms of other historic structures, the fulling mill and the grist mill are all the way down here. It's up here in this other corner. If you could scroll down a little bit,
So we can see, okay, actually, I guess you need to scroll up. There we go. There we go, right there. Yeah, so this was what I was asking Mr. Lecky about, because this is expanded like this, it's sort of alarming. But I'm sure there's a reason. The dam itself that serves the mission is somewhere right around here. And historically, the aqueduct from that dam actually went along here and along here and along here and along here, all the way over to the mission over here. Right? So I'm not worried about the aqueduct at this point in time, but just for reference, we should know that the dam is there. And if you start working in the creek and go too far up it, you'll impact it. Right. And I anticipate the mission's founded in 1804, and presumably the waterworks for it were founded or established soon after.
So I believe this is like this process working exactly how it's supposed to. You know, we've provided this kind of large area. I think it's probably overly large for what we're actually going to end up doing this area. But if they start designing and realize for flood control purposes, or sometimes the biologists need some areas to do like biological restoration to get their permits to get the project permitted, they might realize there are opportunities in this area to do additional work. So that's probably why they're asking us to study it. And now I can go back and say, well, Santa Barbara County told me that, you know, right here, we have a historic period resource and we're going to want to avoid that at all costs.
And Mr. Chair, just for a resource, Michael Imwell of the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation, he knows about this and he could provide more information.
Yeah, I sent Mr. Imwell actually the same letter that y'all got, and he's provided you know, an official response already.
Any other questions? Okay. Commissioner Batosh.
I'm a civil engineer, and so I would be asking technical questions. You're a architect, historian.
Yeah, I may not have too many
not
technical
have
answers, especially not yet. It's not designed really to a high level. We're just
Oh,
studying what's in the area.
that is a response. If you say it hasn't, they have not made decisions. Now, there's a picture in here, image of a section. And it does, I see that it is proposed to be higher. And there was mention of the feathering down to the existing grades and to get over the top, get the bridge up high enough. My question originally was the impact to the stream bed downstream, because that leads to this grist mill and pulling
Mhm.
mill. And they're not knowing, I don't think there are any structures, but there may have been inhabitants along the stream. Anyway, I just wondered if those resources were going to be, if there is work being proposed in the stream bed, that there would be some observation of that.
I'm sorry, just kind of
Work in the stream bed.
clarifying the question. Yeah, are we talking about like changing like the flow of
Well, I
water downstream?
don't think it is proposed to change the flow.
Mhm.
But I imagine that some of there's going to be a lot of grading and earthwork to get these caissons in there and the new bridge. I'm just wondering what that grading and earthwork, if there will be some observation from an archaeological or historian's point of view of that excavation, in case they run into burial site or some kind of a.
Right, yeah, so and sadly our archaeologist, Blaze, Uva, she was unable to come with me today. She called me up yesterday morning and told me she was not feeling well, so she stayed home. So that's a question I would have liked to have deferred to her about the excavation and potential for our archaeological impacts. But any additional questions that you may have that I can't speak to, would be glad to bring them back to the appropriate person, at District 5 to, provide a better answer.
I wanted to make sure that question is out there.
Yeah,
And I also
appreciate it.
looking at this map, and knowing that the creek flows on the north side of the highway there. And the project area extends quite a bit into the treed landscape on the south side of the highway. My experience of driving along that highway is that the topography on would be the south going west is considerably as high topography as a steep slope. And so I wouldn't think that the project would impact the slope or yet, or even the biological resources in that area would be closer to the highway. I'm just wondering why it's up there on up to the crest of the hill.
No, yeah, I highly doubt it as well. I think especially as you go east, most of our project impacts are probably going to be, like I said, grading and feathering the road. A lot of times in these preliminary surveys, when we start environmental work on these projects, they just give us an area to study. So sometimes it's just, design takes it 50 feet from the center line or something, and just gives us a blob to look at. So, I mean, we can go back and ask them if there'll be any impacts, but I highly doubt it.
So the last question is again, a little technical, but essentially building this dam and building the levee that goes up to the bridge, building the bridge, I mean, that goes up to the bridge and back down again on the upstream side, that ramp essentially provides another block to the flow of water. And are we heading into, and it's going to raise the grade outside the place where I get my gas and where people drive into the little stores there. Are they going to have trapped water there again? Because there is water from that parking lot that drains into the creek as well. So we have water that is coming downstream as well as water shedding off the opaque surface areas. It seems like there's a potential for a trap, another water trap, even though you raise the bridge.
Yeah, again, these are questions that I can't answer. I'm not an engineer or a hydraulic engineer or anything, but I am glad to bring them back to District 5. And these are things that they're going to have to, heavily consider during the design phase. So I'm actually not sure when this project goes to construction, but I know it's not like for many years. So we start kind of with environmental clearance, which is really just looking at the potential, in my case, historic areas or biological areas and what have you that, we need to clear for them to begin to have a good idea of how to do their design work.
One last, this is not a question, or maybe it is a question. The image of the section shows the traffic lanes, and then it shows a what do you call it? A multi-use trail on either side.
Mhm.
And there is fencing between the traffic and the trail, and there is fencing at the edge of the trail. And they show two options. The word steel occurs in one option, and the word concrete occurs in the other option. And I was just wondering what those, they're referred to as standard Caltrans details. So I was just wondering how we get to see those before they happen.
Again, I'll probably have to take that back
Well, that's a
to
question.
some of the engineers, but
Yeah.
I can't point to the
Okay.
specific in my mind right now.
I
If
understand.
you want, I'll take a seat with you and look at the plans and potentially answer the question, but
Well, I just wanted to get that question out on the record. so
Yeah.
that we can address that
are they
at some
referring
future
to
time.
like barriers?
Yes,
Is
the
it
barriers,
It's
yeah.
barriers.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the idea would be to have something that was more sympathetic with the older
Right.
style rather than the modern crash railings and so forth.
And these, particular areas, it's probably something that I could bring back to like our landscape architecture team. If there are preferences within the community, like I don't know if that necessarily would fall within our historical resource process, but there are other avenues to have that discussion later on.
Well, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Any other commissioner questions? I think Commissioner Witosh asked the question, but I just want to make sure it was clarified. When are you planning, when this project is going, since there are so many historical resources around the area, like the old dam and the mills, are you planning, and there's going to be a lot of grading to be able to get this bridge higher and make the stream bed lower. Are you planning to have a historic resource on site during that construction in case they come across something that might be historic that we don't know is there?
So this is something that Blaze and I have been discussing. It kind of falls within this sort of interesting area between our two disciplines. Her as the archaeologist, but more on the prehistoric side, and me as the historian. So we're currently in the process of putting together of doing surveys and putting together the documentation for our SHPO consultations. And this is sort of the local consultation process playing out right here. So it's preliminary, but I think, and Blaze, I don't think has had a chance to go out to the site yet, but we were planning on doing it when we headed back from this meeting. I think I'll still go and kind of walk around in light of what we've been talking about. But yeah, I think we just have to do the kind of preliminary pedestrian survey, sort of look at the ground, get specifically her eyes on the ground and see what's there. And then we can kind of decide on where to go from there. But with the information that y'all brought to me about, you know, the historic period resources in the area, I'd say it's definitely our eyes are on it at this point. So I think there's a good chance we'll, I can't necessarily say what we're going to propose for that sort of minimization measure yet, because it's not up to me specifically, but it's on the table for sure.
Thank you. That's my only question.
And of course, you guys can recommend that, you know, as part of your findings.
Okay, thank you.
It looks like we have your colleague Blaze. She has her hands up.
Oh,
in the-
okay,
In the
great.
chat.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Yes, just to talk to the archaeological piece of this project, we are going to conduct some initial Native American outreach, as well as archaeological surveys and background record searches to see, you know, what resources are in the area, as well as appropriate mitigation, which typically does include environmentally sensitive area fencing for any type of potentially eligible archaeological resource, as well as native and archaeological monitoring. I still have yet to send out those consultations to our local Native American folks, but that is to be determined. But I'm assuming, yes, there will be some type of archaeological monitoring for the ground disturbance phase of the project.
Thanks, Blaze.
Thank you so much for chiming in.
Sure, thank you.
Commissioner Duncan?
Mr. Chair, yeah, just a little bit more of the historical tidbit. Many of the historic routes in the valley were nothing like what they are today. They were circuitous and windy, and they had to do from going from one community to another, not getting through the valley as quick as we can to Highway 101. And so what you see is a bunch of places where Caltrans over the years has basically straightened it out. And so because of that, you sometimes find things you don't expect to find. So that, for instance, the road, of course, that goes through the Solvang goes to the Mission. And on the very earliest maps of the San Ynez Valley, that's all you see is the Mission. And actually, you entered typically coming over into Howie Grade. Is what you. It was much later that the pass road was really developed, and originally it was a toll road. But right here, this is Old Mission Drive, and Old Mission Drive used to go like this, and then Caltrans came along and straightened this out. So that's one of the reasons why we have such a strange arrangement of properties here. But it also means that some of these areas aren't as disturbed as they might expect to be, or others have been disturbed more than you expect them to be.
Yeah, I'd imagine a lot of our sites are in kind of discrete areas, so, but I appreciate between Bill and Mr. Imwali, from Santa Barbara Landmarks, kind of pointing out some of these, parts of the National Historic Landmark District or things that are associated with it, even if they're not within the district boundaries, that we should be keeping an eye out for, you know. And again, I think that that's just this process working exactly how it doesn't always work exactly how it's supposed to, but I think in this case, it's actually doing its job. So that makes me happy.
Okay, that's all for questions. So let's move on to, do we have any public comment on this?
We have received no requests to speak, and we have nobody in the attendees column.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's move on to final comments by commissioners. Who would like to start? Go ahead, Commissioner Ritash.
I think my final comments would really pertain to the questions that I asked earlier about the creek bed itself, the area that is incorporated into the project area. Is that necessary? What happens to the water? And I think there was one other comment about the railings. I would be wanting to see railings, an elevation of what this thing looks like. I think that will happen, but it's just not there yet. Those are some of my comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Duncan.
Mr. Chair, yes, I'd just like to thank Mr. Lackey for attending and giving us the opportunity to be in at very early stages of the design of this project. That's the point of scoping. And as of now, I would say the things we're most concerned about are further away. But of course, we never know what you'll find in the way of history once you start digging. Thank you.
Right. Just a question on my end, moving forward, can I expect like a letter or something that will kind of codify some of those additional questions and items for me to get back to you on in the future, or any recommendations from the board?
Yeah, I could do like a memorandum, like we do when we give to another commission what our stocks are, so we can maybe consolidate that. And yeah, and maybe Commissioner Witosh and Commissioner Duncan can help me with putting this together, and then we can send that on to you, so you'll have a documentation. But we do have the minutes too from this meeting, which we publish.
A letter would be excellent to fold into the SHPO stuff and put into our reporting. Just kind of cleans all that stuff up and helps us to incorporate your comments into that more official process with the State Historic Preservation Office.
Okay, we'll work on that.
Yeah, thank you.
And you, I know this is still in initial phases, but do you have some of the deadline for this part of the phase that you're looking at?
So I started the local consultation process pretty early. I think we're trying to wrap up SHPO in the fall. So if you guys could do it, I'm on vacation in May. If you guys could do it by like the end of May, like, you know, you can do another meeting or deliberate or whatever, but if you could do it by like the end of May around Memorial Day or early June, that would be, I would appreciate it.
Okay, yeah, because we'll just do a letter with our comments from today, so they'll be on there. Other commissioner comments? Yeah, just my quick comments is your initial letter mentioned the 3 businesses, the Solvang Animal Hospital Wellness Center, Bennett's Barbershop, All Ponds. If there might have any historical resource. I personally looked at them and I did not see them. The other commissioners haven't mentioned it, but I feel that they do not rise to the level of historic resource. And of course, the bridge, you asked about the bridge, and it's been pretty much clear that it's not a historic resource. My comment is what I mentioned earlier is I think this, because of the history of so much historic resources around the area, that during the actual project, it would be nice to see a historian on site in case they dig up something that we don't know is there now. Because it's obviously, we're gonna have to go deeper to get that channel deeper so it doesn't flood in the future. And there's, all kinds of environmental aspects with the animals and stuff in the area, plants in the area, but also the historic stuff that could be buried up there. So my personal recommendation is to have that during the project. So those are my comments, and we will work on a letter and we'll get that to you. And thank you for driving down here for us today to do this in person, and have a nice vacation.
Thank you. Yeah, of course, my pleasure. And I hope to do it more in the future. This is a lot nicer than the Zoom thing from home. So yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Have a good one. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Okay, well, that was our only agenda item, standard agenda item today. So I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting for April 10th, 2023. And our next meeting date scheduled for May 10th at 10 o'clock. And we will be back in the 4th floor supervisors hearing room for that meeting. Thank you very much. What did I say? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm May 8th. I'm sorry.